Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to a brand new movie review. I'm Chris Garner, joined with Tom Woods, and we're here today to give our review on Alien, the original 1979 science fiction horror film directed by Ridley Scott, in anticipation for Alien Covenant, which comes out this weekend for us in the UK. We're going to do our very best to bring you a review on every single Alien movie in the lead up to that film. We already have a review for Prometheus on the channel, and we might actually save Alien vs Predator until next year for when the new Predator film comes out. We're just going to try and get as many of these done before that point. So I guess we don't have a plan for this at all. This is going to be a general discussion and probably incredibly spoiler filled. I don't think we're going to split this into two sections. We're just going to have a general chat about this film. So if you haven't seen Alien and you do want to see it, you are curious about it, go and watch it first and then come back to us. We'll also be giving our review on the director's cut version of this movie, and indeed all the director's cuts of the other Alien movies as well. So I guess we'll get into this thing by sort of your history with the Alien franchise and just give her an overall opinion on how you got into it.
Oh, well, my involvement with Alien started from when I was like 10 years old.
Right.
and I had a friend over, and this was at the time when, you know, VHS was booming. And we went down the rental shop because, you know, if nobody knows what a rental shop is, it's where you go and rent movies, or films rather. I
miss those days.
Yeah. But I had to persuade my mother to rent this really obscure looking box. And I didn't know what it was. On the cover it had the alien egg, Alien, and the tagline, "In space, no one can hear you scream." And, you know, it was an immediate draw. So picked up this video cassette tape. My mum had to rent it because obviously it was an 18 at the time.
Yeah.
And still is. It and went home, watched it, and it scared the shit out of me.
I'm guessing which scene in particular would probably be the one that stuck out most in your mind.
Yes.
Watching that the first time.
Yeah.
You talked about the poster there, and actually, I mean, this is classed as a horror film as well as a science fiction film. This is actually usually in the top 10 of best horror film lists if you check the internet. I love the poster to this thing, and there's something really special about those old VHS cassette tapes that you talked about, especially when it comes to horror movies where you can be intimidated and scared by a movie just by the front cover alone.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I remember back to some horror films like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre VHS cassette tape or The Shining with Jack Nicholson's grin on the front. And that alone made me not want to watch the movie as a kid. But Alien, there's something... It's a perfect poster because it's completely mysterious. You've just got the egg and the glow coming from it. And that tagline is probably one of the best taglines in cinema history, in all honesty. And I think the initial concept of this movie when it was being written was that they wanted to essentially make Jaws in space and have that same level of suspense with it.
Well, I mean, they kind of... Well, I mean, the two films are completely different, but yeah. I think they did kind of do a good job of replicating Jaws, you know, in space. But no, I think this is one of my favourite films, and, you know, ever since I watched it the first time, I've been hooked on all of them.
See, with me, it's very different how I got into this franchise. I mean, I watched this really, really late on. I probably watched this movie for the first time about 3 or 4 years ago. And it's strange how there's this whole which team are you on site, like Team Predator or Team Alien. And I guess that came... I think there was comic books that were released back in the day that had those two characters featured. And then, obviously, many years later, they did the two movies. I was always a Predator guy. I always liked my 80s cheesy action films with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers chasing down the Predator. And Alien just never really took my interest. And the first time I watched it, I didn't really care for it. Then I watched the second one, Aliens, and still, as of this recording, they're the only two Alien movies I've seen, so I need to catch up with them. I much preferred Aliens. James Cameron, you get to see the Alien Queen, the action's ramped up, all of that. Then I watched this movie last week in preparation for this review, and I watched this movie and Aliens back to back, and I had this really just complete epiphany with this film. And this is by far my favourite one out of the two now. It's like a complete switch. It's almost like I saw a completely different movie Kind of how I did with Blade Runner as well, also directed by Ridley Scott. I just think the pace of this one, the tone of it, and just it feels so much more claustrophobic and terrifying than Aliens.
Well, yeah, oh, definitely. But the thing I feel that it does really well, and most horror films nowadays don't get right, is the pace.
Yes,
and it doesn't. It's very tense, but it's slow and methodical, and it only jump scares when when there's no other alternative, or when it's tricking you into a jump scare and nothing happens.
Yeah,
it's really slow build up rather than the standard horror trope of all bang, 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 just loud noises at you. I mean, there are a couple of loud noises, but nothing overly so, and it builds the tension from the very first scene on, when you're going through the corridors of the Nostromo, and it's lifeless, and it's devoid of any kind of personality, and that's kind of the feeling when they're in space, nothing's alive, the only living thing they come into contact with wants to kill them. It's fantastic. I absolutely love it.
Yeah,
it just gets everything right that a horror film should adhere to. Nice and tense, and really scary.
Absolutely, and most of my favourite horror films, like John Carpenter's The Thing and The Shining, and this one too, all deal with that theme of isolation. And as a viewer, especially if you watch like this in a dark room, you are completely with the crew in this film. And actually, comparing it to The Thing, I know this one came before, but one of the biggest strengths of this movie, other than like the visual effects and the conceptual design and the model making and everything like that, is the main cast. They are so believable together. They feel like an actual work crew. They feel like colleagues that have been thrown together in this situation. They're on this mission, and they're also likable. I mean, the talent in this film, you've got Sigourney Weaver, who she did feature in a couple of films before, but this was her first breakout role. You've got Tom Skerritt, you've got Ian Holm as well, who I think before this point was more or less just a theatre actor. But they're all just so naturalistic how they work off each other, and I think that that's where the strength of this movie comes in. After I watch the two of them compared to Aliens, Aliens is fun in that you get the cheesy one-liners and you get Bill Paxton's character and everything like that, but these feel like regular people, and I think that's why you can connect with them more, and you have more of a sympathy for them as they're getting picked off constantly by the xenomorph.
Oh yeah, and also going into sort of controversial territory with this, and it was at a time when a female character was written as a person, rather than we need to make her badass because she needs to what's the word I'm looking for, she needs to hold her own against men or whatever. Not that I'm bashing feminists or anything. It's just the feeling I get from the film that this is actually. I mean, even in casting, they wrote it. It wasn't particularly. It was going to be an
all-male cast.
Yeah, it was going to be an all-male cast, but the fact that you can just put Sigourney Weaver into the role speaks volumes for how it was written. It was written as if she was just. You could put anyone in that position or in that role, but the casting is superb. I think most of, or actually if not all of them, portray a good sense of comradeship as well at the beginning, which slowly kind of deteriorates or doesn't really deteriorate, but it's questioned, and they're all, but when the alien is stalking them, they are still believable. They do things you think real people would do, and and they formulate plans that would work if the alien wasn't so sneaky.
Yeah, and the reason I prefer this one to more or less any of the other Alien films, especially with the likes of Prometheus, is that the crew in this film aren't really dumb.
No.
In Prometheus, when they go to the planet, they're going against their natural scientific professionalism and doing stupid things which gets them in the situation.
Yeah.
And I know that John Hurt's character in this is just genuinely inquisitive when he goes to the planet, but it is this larger-than-life experience. They are trying to they go to a distress signal, isn't it, I think, that's coming from the ship, and they explore it, and then that kind of, the curiosity ultimately kills them in the end. But it's much more believable in this one than any of the other Alien films, I think.
Oh yeah, the fact that Ripley doesn't want to let them on board because it's a contaminant, outside contaminant is great. No one, if this was Prometheus, they just let's bring them on so we can have him for dinner or whatever. It's only Ian Holm's character, who turns out to be a robot in the end. Spoiler. That really. That is the catalyst for letting them in, and everyone outside that's trapped outside is urging Ripley to open the doors, but she's insistent that there needs to be a quarantine procedure in place before she can open the doors because of an outside contaminant. And it's really great. It's really good characterization and really good writing. It's not I go back to Prometheus on this one, where the characters do dumb things because they need to move the plot along. This feels like the characters make the story happen through their interactions rather than dumb decisions.
And they're all engaging characters as well. I mean, even Lambert, I guess Lambert would probably be my least favourite character out of the crew, but even her reactions are completely believable. I mean, I think this has been said loads of times, but the chestburster scene, she wasn't aware that they were going to have blood spraying everywhere, and I believe it was real blood. I think it was pig blood they had all hooked up to the animatronic, and it just sprayed out everywhere, went all over, and I think she actually passed out from shock with it happening. And it was just great that they were able to capture those natural reactions from the actors, and they all worked well with one another. I guess I want to talk about Ian Holm, because you brought him up there.
Yeah.
In the initial draft of the script, I don't believe they had the whole android aspect to his character. I think that was brought in a rewrite or a redraft of the script. Completely works in this film, and it just, again, it's that world building quality to it, and Ian Holm just plays, he's the most fascinating character in the entire film.
Oh yeah.
I think people could argue that the android characters are always the most fascinating characters in the Alien films,
because they are I mean, they act completely human, and for all intents and purposes have emotions and things like that. And it was really, really frightening to see a headless Ian Holm trying to strangle Ripley, or trying to attack everybody. It really was frightening. But he is a fantastic actor, and it's a testament to how good he is. He can play human even though he's not. But no, I was going to say that you mentioned it before we started recording about the prosthetic Ian Holm head and how sort of not very good it looks. I mean, I think it looks great. And
it's only in a few shots. I think there's one scene in the film that jump cuts, and it feels like a very unnatural edit. It's they put the prosthetic head down, it jump cuts, and then it's Ian Holm's head through the floor.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that really stood out to me, because everything else in this movie pretty much holds up perfectly.
Oh yeah, the special effects, the special effects are fantastic. And the models are really good, and this was at a time when Star Wars got the model ship booming.
Yeah.
And they capitalized on that. Very minimal. It's not the same as Star Wars in the sense that it uses its miniatures in a minimalistic style. It doesn't use them too much that you think, well, maybe they could have cut down on that. But the costume, or the alien itself, is something I want to sort of bring up.
Yeah.
Because you don't see it that often, and when you do, it's close-ups, and it makes it feel more menacing. It's like the fact that what lurks behind the corner, or what you think lurks behind the corner, is actually more scary than what actually is round the corner.
Yeah.
And when the brief times when you do see the alien in full glory, maybe sometimes it diminishes that factor to the alien itself, but the fact that they filmed it much like Jaws, in the way that it shows that it doesn't show much of the shark, it doesn't show much of the alien either, and that really makes it that much more scary.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up the Jaws thing as well. Jaws, they had the animatronic that didn't work. This was a guy in a costume.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and pronounce his name because I'll probably absolutely ruin it. I think he was like 7 foot tall or something, and the costume actually looks great. I've seen some of the behind the scenes where they're putting this full costume on him, but there's also a great video on the internet that surfaced, I think it was a few years ago now, where it's B-roll footage from filming Alien, and it's just him sort of stalking down the corridor. I think he took like mime lessons. I don't know if he was a dancer or something like that, but he worked on what movements he could bring to the alien. And when you see the full costume in good lighting, it doesn't look great. But Ridley Scott was just incredible of how he chose which shots and just his shot choices in this film, because I don't think you really see a full clear shot of the costume itself. I think the only one that would come close to it is when you see it dangling out the back of the ship towards the end of the film.
You do see it when Christ, what's his name? What's the character's name? Blah, 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 a quick scan.
So the guy with the cat.
Yeah. Parker.
Yeah.
I think it's Parker. I'm gonna try and pronounce his name. Yaphet Kotto. Yeah. I think he stands in front of it. Or no, is it Brett? Harry Dean Stanton?
I think it might be Brett, because Parker gets taken out with Lambert when they're trying to get through the door, and you only really see the mouth within a mouth is the only thing I can really call it from the xenomorph. Yeah.
I've just off topic, not off topic, but Ian Holm, 46 at the time of filming. 46.
Yeah.
Oh, the guy has been around. Ridley Scott to me is one of my favourite film directors, but his track record, we were talking about this before, his track record hasn't been particularly great. He's made really good films followed by really shit ones.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that his good films absolutely trump the bad ones. So you can still say he's a fantastic filmmaker.
Oh yeah, but his what really sets him apart, I think, even in his bad films, is his world building and how he creates his worlds. And with H.R. Geiger also helping to create a world in which, is very mysterious and has a lot of mythology to it, but doesn't give you any of it. You're left to wonder, what the history behind this is. And I think his world building, starts here and escalates all throughout all his other work, but it's very minimal in its approach, which I actually really love.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I dislike Prometheus, because that went out of its way to explain the genealogy of the xenomorph and everything like that too much.
Yeah.
I know it raised questions in and of itself as well, but we don't need to know all that stuff. It's more terrifying when we don't know. The fact that we get introduced to the space jockey in the crashed ship, we see it there and it looks like an alien creature, and then I guess by the time we get to Prometheus we find out that that's just a suit. It looks completely different to the one in Prometheus. Whether we'll find that out in Alien Covenant, I'm not sure. But just even the designs for that, even the designs of the ship, and you talked about Star Wars earlier, and I think you can definitely see that. I know that when they came to film the miniatures, they couldn't use the same techniques used on Star Wars, because this was a significantly lower budget than Star Wars was. But I think they filmed the ship, the Nostromo, in 2.5 frames a second, and that gave it the appearance of motion. And also with Star Wars as well, where you look at like the Millennium Falcon and just the feeling of everything feels aged within this universe, even though this is set in the future. They've all still got like the 70s computers and computer screens, and
it's such a brilliant aesthetic look to it. The fact that these workers, these miners, whatever they are using sort of kind of outdated technology for the time period they're in is really fantastic, and that's one of my favourite things about the film. the same aesthetic is present in the video game Alien Isolation. It still keeps that sense of aesthetic quality, but the 70s look is really, really good, and it really makes it feel that much more believable. It doesn't have all the sleek designs or anything like that say Star Wars did. It was very much more grittier, realer, and they were thrust. They just seemed like they were thrust into an extraordinary situation, and this was just a routine, thing for them. They were in hypersleep. They get woken up. It was going to be a journey, a brief journey back to Earth, but nope, shit goes wrong.
And I love that the compelling force behind it is where Ian Holmes says that it's within the contract, and I think the company is referenced in this movie.
Yes,
I don't know if it's referenced by name. Maybe it's on the computer when Sigourney Weaver's character discovers the ultimate plan that Ian Holmes' android character did have for them all. I don't know if you can see the logo of the Weyland Corporation on there. But it ultimately comes down to money. It's like, we are given the task, if we pick up any transmissions out there, we have to go and check it out.
Yeah.
So they are ultimately doomed from the beginning until we get to Ian Holmes' ultimate plan. I keep calling him Ian Holm. I should call him Ash. When we get to Ash's ultimate plan. And this is where his character's very interesting, because even though he attacks Ripley in the film, there's never really a moment where I consider him a villain, because he's just been given these orders, and his whole angle and his perception on what the xenomorph is and why he appreciates it. I think he says that he admires its purity, I think is the line that he uses in the movie. It's really kind of a beautiful moment, because you could say that he's been created and all forms of life to him are interesting, and this is a species that's never been discovered, which is a factor that features into the sequel when we get to oh god, it's Burke, isn't it, in the sequel, the corporation guy.
Yeah.
But I love Ash in this film. He's definitely the most interesting and complex character out of the entire crew, I think.
Well, when he attacks Ripley, I think it's more out of desperation that she is gonna destroy the ship and the alien itself. And when the plan falls through, what's his only option really is to get rid of the crew so he can continue with his mission.
Yeah.
And in the end, when his head's been knocked off and that you got Ian Holmes' head popped up out of the floor, he doesn't. He helps them, or he gives them more information than perhaps he should have, but he knows he's gonna die anyway. So it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
I wonder if that's because in that moment he realizes he sees that quality that he almost sees in the xenomorph in Ripley, the want to survive, the absolute strive to do anything it takes to stay alive longer. And I mean, that's the quality that he talks about with the xenomorph, and maybe that's what he sees in Ripley, and maybe that's why he divulges some information.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a great pairing when you look at it that way, between Ripley and the xenomorph in the end, because it's two species just trying to find a way to survive, to the point where the xenomorph is smart enough to stow away on board the shuttle at the end. Like, you think she's got away. It's the classic horror trope where you think she's got away, but oh no, not quite. It's it's one step ahead of her in that regard.
But if this was a typical horror movie, the for example, what's the thing that comes to mind? Oh yeah, Quarantine. Right, you think they get to safety, but no, they get dragged off at the end. It could have done that, and I think it would have been it would have hurt the film if they did do that. Thankfully, they didn't, and you get pretty badass, Sigourney Weaver, Ellen Ripley, who really grows into a heroic character, and someone who really wants to survive, and she even takes the cat with her.
The cat survives. I know that's like a thing, isn't it? I think there's a website out there like, does the animal in the movie survive? Yes, it does. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can say. We've talked about H.R. Geiger's designs. if you look at the early concept art for this thing, it's incredible. Like, I'd love this stuff on like a canvas or like a poster or something, like his original designs, and they're pretty much right from his original artwork is exactly what's translated into the movie. Yeah, final thoughts. It's such a good film. It still completely holds up, but I think it's a film that, with modern audiences now that might like that, you know, more action in it, more gore and things like that. I mean, if we look at the trailer for Alien Covenant, we've got the whole hovercraft thing sort of crashing and the CGI alien queen trying to headbutt its way in. You don't need all that stuff. And this is really just such a simple story, a simple horror film, but it's so effective in its world building, its visual design. I mean, it won an Academy Award for that. Its characters, just the acting, everything is perfect in this film. If you don't like slow burn horror films, I would avoid this film if you haven't seen it already, if you're still listening to this and you haven't seen it. But it's so good. And watching it again, I mean, as I said, like, Aliens was always my favourite one out of the two that I'd seen. I just appreciated the pace of it more, but having watched it again after all these years, this is by far my favourite, and I think this is one where it's definitely one of Ridley Scott's best, and this is where they got the Alien formula completely right.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, Ridley Scott has made two of my favourite films of all time.
Yeah.
In Blade Runner and Alien. I mean, Alien is up there for me in terms of its quality, and it's a very, very simple, like you said, a simple story, a simple setup, but it does so much with it that, you know, it has to be applauded. And where other horror films might have failed in that regard to being slow burning and you know, methodical, and this one just really is elevated by its characters, its horror elements, and really the big action. Or I say action scene. It's more it's the escape scene is really good. One thing I do think is kind of unnecessary, but works for the works for the director's cut. Where they find Christ,
Tom Skerritt's character. See, I've never watched the theatrical version, and I know that Ridley Scott says that out of the two versions, he does prefer the theatrical. It's about 5 minutes shorter or something like that. I think they add 4 minutes in of deleted scenes, and then they remove so many minutes. I think he tightened up some of the editing. I will go back and watch the theatrical version, but I think I need to watch the director's cut version more so it's completely cemented in my mind of all the scenes that, you know, weren't in there. I guess it is unnecessary, and I think if you watch the theatrical version that doesn't have the cocoon scene of Dallas's character, I think that plays up to the mystery more, like what happened to him, because I think they say like they found no blood or anything like that. They had no trace of his body, and they don't know what happened to him, and that mystery is appealing. It's the ambiguity of what happened to him, what the alien did to him. The whole cocooning thing, though, I think it's a really cool aspect to the xenomorph and shows how it hunts its prey, which comes into it much more into the second one. So I guess if nothing else, you could see it as set up for the second one.
Yeah.
But even as these are the kind of films I like, and even the sequels I like, and we'll talk about Aliens in a minute once we get onto our next review. The films that are still very much self-contained. You don't have to have watched the previous one or anything like that to go into it. And this movie, it doesn't sequel bait. It's a completely self-contained movie that you can watch on its own if you didn't want to watch any of the other Alien films. I don't know any other scenes that were in the director's cut version. I know there's a couple of other added scenes, so I'll have to give the theatrical one a watch. But I think the cocoon scene is the main addition.
Yeah, but no, I think it's a fabulous film, and you know, one of my favourite horror films ever made, if not my favourite horror film, next to, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, and you know, real surrealist imagery, and you know, having H.R. Geiger really elevated, you know, the surrealism aspect, because he is a surrealist painter, or was. But it's fabulous. I would recommend this to anyone. If you don't like, if you're more the kind of jump scares galore, that's not scary, is it?
No,
really. You're just kind of like jumping at a noise, and then you're not scared. Whereas this, the things you don't see are always the things that scare you more.
Mm-hmm. And even the things you do see, I mean, I know I said that out of all the effects, the Ian Holm prosthetic head is probably the weakest, but that's not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, I still appreciate practical effects in movies. and they are incredible in that scene, and even the music as well. I mean, we haven't talked about the music. Jerry Goldsmith's score, not the kind of music I'd expect from this film, and there's only a few sweeping orchestral moments towards the end and the beginning of the film that really stand out to me. I think it's kept very much to a minimum in the film. But it works for the film. It adds to that mystery. There's kind of like whimsy to it as well in some scenes. I love the score to this thing. I'm going to have to give it a listen on its own, I think, but it completely works for the movie.
Oh yeah.
I think I've covered everything now.
Yeah, I'm lost for words. This film really does make me lose my train of thought, because I just think someone actually made this, and someone actually, you know, made this absolute masterpiece. And I don't it's out of the two, Ridley Scott is still one of my favourite directors, and no matter what he churns out, he still will be, because his first two films are, or his early films are, real quality, and these are the two highlights of that early career.
Yeah, and I mean, I was watching this one and just kind of sitting back in my seat going, they don't make films like this anymore. Well, especially horror films and sci-fi films,
yeah.
But just films in general like this now. And actually, my local theatre, the Odeon, were doing an Alien Day, it was called, where they're rescreening Prometheus. You get like an all-day ticket, essentially, from the box office, and you get to see a rescreening of Prometheus, oh joy of joys, followed by that prologue that was released on YouTube. I thought that was going to be an exclusive, the bridging prologue that ties between Prometheus into Alien Covenant. I believe there's some behind the scenes interviews and footage of Alien Covenant, and then they're doing a rescreening of this original 1979 one. In the UK, that price for that ticket was £20. So, I mean, I would have loved to have seen this movie on the big screen, but you've kind of got to sit through Prometheus and a whole bunch of stuff that I don't particularly care about to get to it. I will say as well, very interesting comparison that I always compare Terminator to. The first film in this franchise is very much sort of like a horror thriller, whereas the second one dials up the action, which is exactly what the first two Terminator films did, and the sequel was both directed by James Cameron, and that is the next movie we'll be reviewing. We'll be giving our review on Aliens. I think we've pretty much said everything we can on this Alien movie, so that'll do it for our review on this. Join us again when we'll be giving our review on James Cameron's Aliens and the rest of the Alien franchise. Be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, hit the bell icon at the side so you get a notification every time we bring out a new review, and until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.